I'm Anna Caldwell, 33, and I'm watching my own family prepare to steal everything from me. Standing in the boardroom of Ascend Labs, my company, my creation, feels like a courtroom as my parents and sister Sarah sit there with their lawyers, ready to strip me of my CEO position. You've proven you can't handle this responsibility, my mother says, sliding the documents toward me. Sarah is practically glowing with satisfaction, probably already redecorating my office in her head. They think they've cornered me, that I have no choice but to surrender. Little do they know, I've been 3 steps ahead this entire time. My family, the Caldwells, lived in a pristine Tudor mansion in Westchester County, where my father, Robert Caldwell, had built his pharmaceutical consulting firm into a multi-million-dollar empire. From the outside, we appeared to be the perfect American success story, wealthy, accomplished, and tight-knit. But inside those mahogany-paneled walls, love was a commodity that required constant earning, and I was always coming up short. My parents, Robert and Margaret, had me first, but when Sarah arrived 3 years later, everything changed. From the moment she entered the world, she could do no wrong. Sarah was their golden child, beautiful, charming, and blessed with an intuitive understanding of exactly what our parents wanted to hear. She had glossy dark hair that never seemed to have a strand out of place, perfect grades that came effortlessly, and a social grace that made adults light up whenever she spoke. While I struggled through piano lessons, Sarah would sit down and play complex pieces by ear. When I brought home A-minuses, Sarah would casually mention her perfect report card over dinner, watching our parents beam with pride. Everything I did was measured against Sarah's achievements, and I was always found lacking. Anna, why can't you be more like your sister, became the unofficial family motto. When Sarah won the school science fair, I was reminded of it for months. When she was elected class president, it somehow became a reflection of my own shortcomings in leadership. I learned early that love in our house wasn't unconditional, it was earned through performance, and Sarah was always the headliner while I remained the opening act. The worst part wasn't the constant comparisons. It was the desperate hope that flickered in my chest every time I thought I might finally break through. I threw myself into academics, staying up late to perfect assignments, memorizing extra facts to impress them at dinner. I joined every club, volunteered for every cause, and pushed myself relentlessly, thinking that if I just worked harder, sacrificed more, they would finally see me as worthy of the same love they showered on Sarah. But it never worked. When I made honor roll, they praised Sarah for maintaining it consistently. When I won a regional programming competition in high school, they worried I was becoming too narrow in my interests. When I expressed fascination with computers and technology, they dismissed it as a phase that would pass once I matured. Programming was my escape, my sanctuary where logic mattered more than favoritism, where problems had solutions that didn't depend on winning my parents' approval. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to MIT's computer science program, a dream I'd worked toward for years. But when I announced my plans at dinner, the reaction was swift and brutal. Computer science, my mother said, her voice dripping with disappointment. Anna, that's not a career for someone with your background. You need to think about your future, about taking over the family business. My father was more direct. You're going to medical school, period. Surgery specifically. The pharmaceutical industry needs doctors who understand both sides of the equation, and I won't have you wasting your potential on some programming hobby. Sarah, naturally, was already planning to follow an approved path that would complement the family empire, business school, then a position helping expand our international operations. The fight that followed was the first time I'd ever stood up to them directly. I told them programming wasn't just a hobby, it was my calling. I explained how I'd already been accepted to MIT, how I'd been coding since I was 12, how I could build things that mattered. But they wouldn't hear it. You're being selfish, my mother said, her voice cold with authority. This family has sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, and this is how you repay us. For 3 months, we were locked in a war of wills. They threatened to cut off tuition payments, to withdraw their support entirely if I didn't come to my senses. Sarah played the role of concerned sister, occasionally suggesting that maybe I should think about what's best for the family. The pressure was suffocating, but I held firm, working extra shifts at my part-time job to save money for MIT. In the end, I caved. Not because I stopped believing in my dream, but because the emotional isolation became unbearable. They had mastered the art of conditional love, and the prospect of losing even their grudging approval felt like death. I enrolled in pre-med at Columbia, following the path they had mapped out for me, watching my dreams of innovation and creation fade into the background. But something had shifted during those months of fighting. I realized that their love would always come with strings attached, that Sarah would always be the favorite, and that I would spend my entire life chasing approval that might never come. The hurt transformed into something sharper, more focused. I would play their game, but I would also find a way to win it on my own terms. Inciting incident: the rebellious spark began 3 months after my Columbia graduation. I was supposed to be studying for the MCAT, preparing for medical school applications, dutifully following the path my parents had carved out for me. Instead, I was hunched over my laptop at 3 a.m. in my childhood bedroom, frantically coding the prototype for what would become Ascend Labs. The idea had hit me during a particularly brutal family dinner where my parents spent an hour detailing my 5-year plan. Medical school, surgical residency, then a prestigious position that would eventually lead to working in the family pharmaceutical business. As they mapped out my entire future without asking what I wanted, I realized how desperately people needed tools to reclaim control over their own lives. That night, I started building an AI-powered productivity platform that would help users identify their authentic goals and create actionable plans to achieve them. For 2 months, I worked in secret, telling my parents I was attending pre-med study groups while actually meeting with real users who had agreed to test my prototype. The early version was crude but functional, a dashboard that could analyze user behavior patterns and suggest personalized productivity strategies. When beta testers started reporting genuine breakthrough moments, I knew I had something special. The confrontation came when my father discovered venture capital research materials in my room. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded, waving printouts of funding applications. "You're supposed to be preparing for medical school, not playing with computers." "It's not playing, Dad. This could actually help people." "Help people?" My mother's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Anna, you're not some garage inventor. You're a Caldwell. We have real responsibilities." I tried explaining the market opportunity, the user feedback, the potential for genuine impact. But they saw only defiance. "You're throwing away your future for some childish fantasy," my father said. "This isn't a real career. It's a hobby that you're deluding yourself into thinking matters." Sarah, home from her business program, watched the argument with concern. "Maybe Anna just needs some time to figure things out," she offered gently, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. Sometimes people need to explore before they settle down. The final straw came when my father threatened to cut off my trust fund if I didn't abandon this ridiculous venture immediately. Standing there in his study, surrounded by awards and accolades from his successful pharmaceutical empire, something inside me snapped. Years of being dismissed, of having my dreams crushed, of being told I wasn't good enough, of being controlled and ignored. It all crystallized into a single moment of clarity. I would never earn their respect by following their path. I had to create my own. "Fine," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Keep your money. I'll do this myself." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, while my father's expression shifted from anger to something almost like panic. They had expected me to fold, to choose security over dreams like I had with MIT. Instead, I moved into a cramped studio apartment in Boston's Tech District, using my modest savings to bootstrap Ascend Labs. I lived on ramen and coffee, working 18-hour days, coding features, and pitching investors who initially dismissed me as another rich kid playing entrepreneur. But slowly, painfully, the company began to grow. My parents' dismissal only fueled my determination. Every skeptical comment, every "when are you going to get a real job?" became motivation to prove them wrong. They wanted me to fail, to come crawling back, humbled and ready to accept their predetermined path. Instead, I poured everything I had into building something that would make them impossible to ignore. 7 months after I had moved out of my family mansion, I sat in my tiny rented office. The harsh blue light of my laptop screen illuminating the cluttered room. The rejection email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Thank you for your presentation, but Meridian Ventures doesn't feel Ascend Labs aligns with our current investment strategy. We wish you the best of luck with your future endeavors. Future endeavors. As if there would be any after this. I stared at the screen until the words blurred together, my fourth cup of coffee growing cold beside a stack of crumpled code printouts. This was the 7th rejection in 3 weeks, each one a little more brutal than the last. Meridian had been my last real shot at series of funding, the investor I'd spent months researching, the one whose portfolio perfectly matched my vision. My eyes drifted to the framed photo on my desk, my parents at last year's Christmas party, looking polished and successful in their designer clothes, standing in front of our family's pharmaceutical empire. For just a moment, I felt that familiar flutter of hope, the childish belief that maybe if I succeeded, they would finally see me as worthy of their pride. But then I remembered my father's words from our last phone call, still playing tech entrepreneur, Anna? When you're ready to grow up, there's always a position waiting for you here. My mother had laughed in the background, that tinkling sound that used to comfort me but now felt like shards of glass. The tears came without warning, hot and angry, dripping onto the keyboard I'd been hunched over for the past 14 hours. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a privileged girl playing at being a CEO, deluding myself into thinking I could build something meaningful. The numbers didn't lie, dwindling bank account, mounting debt, 3 months behind on rent. Across the street, the neon, "For Rent" sign flickered in the window of the empty storefront, casting an orange glow through my blinds. I could end this tomorrow. Pack up my dreams, swallow my pride, and call my parents. They'd take me back, probably with that insufferable mix of relief and condescension that would remind me forever that I'd failed. I reached for my phone, my father's number already pulled up on the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. But I didn't call. Instead, I threw the phone across the room, watching it clatter against the wall. Something deep inside me refused to surrender, a stubborn flame that my parents had tried to extinguish for years but could never quite snuff out completely. The next morning, I dragged myself to a networking event I'd almost skipped. That's where I met Marcus Chin, a mid-level executive at a Fortune 500 company who became Ascend Labs' first major client. His company needed exactly what we offered, a productivity platform that could scale across their global workforce. Within 6 months, we had our first $1 million contract. Success came slowly, then all at once. Our AI algorithms improved with each user interaction, creating genuinely personalized productivity experiences that competitors couldn't match. Tech blogs started featuring us in their "Startups to Watch" lists. Forbes interviewed me for a piece on young entrepreneurs revolutionizing workplace productivity. My cramped office became a sleek downtown space with actual furniture and a team of 12 brilliant developers. But even as Ascend Labs flourished, my relationship with my parents continued to deteriorate. Family dinners became exercises in endurance, where they'd offer backhanded compliments like, "It's nice that your little company is doing well, Anna, but don't let it go to your head." Meanwhile, Sarah received endless praise for her MBA achievements and her seamless integration into the family business. She was already being groomed for leadership roles, attending board meetings and industry conferences while I remained the family disappointment who'd gotten lucky with technology. The emotional void grew wider with each success. When TechCrunch named me to their 30 under 30 list, my mother's response was, "That's lovely, dear. Did you see that Sarah was promoted to Director of International Operations?" When we secured our second major client, my father mentioned that Sarah had just closed a pharmaceutical deal worth 5 times our annual revenue. No matter how high I climbed, they found ways to diminish my achievements. The breaking point came during a family barbecue where my uncle asked about Ascend Labs. Before I could answer, my father interjected, "Anna's playing with computers while Sarah's learning real business." The casual dismissal, delivered with a chuckle while flipping burgers, shattered something inside me. I excused myself, spending the rest of the evening in my childhood bedroom, staring at programming books that now felt like relics of a foolish dream. That's when the expansion opportunity presented itself. A breakthrough AI feature that could revolutionize workplace wellness. Predicting burnout, suggesting optimal work-life balance, essentially creating a digital wellness coach. But developing it required significant investment, far beyond our current capabilities. I spent weeks crafting the perfect pitch, convinced this would be the achievement that finally made my parents see me as worthy of their respect. I had several outside investors expressing serious interest, but when my parents offered to invest, I was so overwhelmed with joy that I didn't even consider the other offers. This was what I'd been waiting for, their belief in me, their willingness to put their money behind my vision. "We've been watching your progress," my father said during our meeting, his voice warmer than I'd heard in years. "Perhaps we underestimated your potential." My mother nodded approvingly, mentioning how impressed their colleagues were with my media coverage. The investment meeting felt like a coronation. They praised my business acumen, my strategic vision, my ability to identify market opportunities. "We always knew you had it in you, Anna," my mother said, her words making my heart swell with long-denied hope. "You just needed to find the right path." That night, we had our first genuinely happy family dinner in years. My parents asked detailed questions about my plans, offered business advice, and even included me in conversations about the family's future. Sarah seemed genuinely proud, congratulating me on bringing our parents around. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like part of a team, part of the family at last. I genuinely believed the business was finally bringing us closer, that success had earned me the love I'd craved for so long. Looking back, I realized that was the moment I became most vulnerable, when hope made me blind to what would play out in future. When my parents insisted Sarah join Ascend Labs as Chief Operating Officer, I actually felt a flutter of excitement. "She has the business expertise you need for the next phase," my father explained over dinner. "And it'll be wonderful to have both my daughters working together." My mother beamed, painting a picture of sisterly collaboration that made my heart ache with longing. Sarah arrived with enthusiasm and intelligence, immediately diving into operational improvements and strategic planning. For the first month, things felt genuinely promising. She streamlined our client onboarding process, negotiated better vendor contracts, and brought an organizational structure that our rapid growth desperately needed. I began to believe this could be the new chapter I'd always dreamed of, finally working alongside my sister as equals, finally being part of the family business in a meaningful way. But then the subtle shifts began. It started with informal after-work drinks. Sarah would casually mention to key team members that she was grabbing drinks at the trendy bar across the street, somehow always forgetting to extend the invitation to me. When I'd ask about joining, she'd say, "Oh, we're just discussing boring operational stuff. You probably want to get home anyway." I'd watch from my office window as my own employees laughed and bonded with my sister, building relationships that increasingly excluded me. The first major red flag came during a Monday morning meeting when I discovered Sarah had greenlit an entirely new feature called Synergy Hub with our development team. "Oh, I thought we'd already discussed this, Anna," she said with perfect innocence when I questioned her about it. The team was so excited about my idea, I just ran with it. "You know how important it is to maintain momentum in product development." I was left speechless, my authority openly disregarded in front of the entire team. Marcus, my lead developer who'd been with me since the beginning, avoided eye contact. The feature wasn't terrible, it was actually quite good. But that wasn't the point. The point was that major decisions were being made without my input in my own company. During family dinners, Sarah's comments became increasingly pointed. "It's so much harder to innovate when you're stuck in old ways of thinking, isn't it, Dad?" she'd say while discussing industry trends. Or, "Ascend Labs really needs someone who understands modern business scaling, not just product development, Mom." Each comment was delivered with a sweet smile, but I felt the sting of implied criticism. My parents nodded approvingly, praising Sarah's fresh perspective and business acumen. When I tried to defend my strategic vision, they'd exchange glances that said everything. Their golden child was once again proving her superiority. The isolation became suffocating. I'd walk into meetings I'd called, expecting support from colleagues who'd been with me for years, only to be met with cold, averted gazes. Conversations would stop when I entered rooms, resuming only after I'd passed. I overheard whispers about my losing her touch and resistance to change. Jennifer, my marketing director, actually told me to trust Sarah's judgment on a campaign I'd specifically rejected. I began spending more time alone in my office, staring at the Ascend Labs logo on my monitor screen. The company I'd built from nothing, the dream I'd sacrificed everything for, now felt foreign and hostile. I was becoming a stranger in my own home, watching helplessly as Sarah methodically dismantled my relationships and authority. The psychological warfare was relentless and sophisticated. Sarah never directly confronted me, never raised her voice, never did anything that couldn't be explained away as enthusiasm or initiative. But every day brought new evidence that she was building her own empire within mine, positioning herself as the real leader while I became increasingly irrelevant. I started questioning everything. Was I paranoid? Was I losing my mind? Was Sarah just that much better at running a company than I was? The doubt crept in like poison, making me second-guess every decision, every interaction, every instinct that had gotten me this far. Some nights, I'd sit in my empty office after everyone had gone home, considering just walking away. Maybe I could sell my shares, take whatever money I could get, and disappear. The constant psychological warfare was eating me alive, and I wasn't sure how much more I could endure. The family dinner that night had been particularly brutal. Sarah had spent the entire evening subtly undermining me, mentioning leadership challenges at Ascend Labs while our parents nodded knowingly. I'd left feeling dizzy with self-doubt, wondering if I was imagining the careful orchestration of my isolation. I was halfway to my car when I realized I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter. The house was dark except for a warm glow from the living room as I quietly let myself back in with my key. I was about to call out when I heard Sarah's voice, hushed but triumphant, drifting from the living room. It was so easy to convince the marketing director that Anna's ideas were outdated, she was saying, her tone carrying a satisfaction I'd never heard before. He's totally on board now. And with Dad's shares, we can simply force the vote. Anna will be out by next month. I froze in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be real. This had to be some misunderstanding, some conversation taken out of context. But Sarah continued, her voice growing more animated. She's so clueless, she still thinks I'm trying to help her. All those little suggestions about collaboration and fresh perspectives, she ate it up. She actually believed we were bonding. There was a soft laugh, cruel and calculated. Once she's gone, you and Dad will finally see I was always the right choice. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then my mother's voice, warm with approval, "We've always known, sweetheart. We've always known." Those words, clueless, force the vote, always the right choice, carved themselves into my brain like acid. The world tilted sideways as the full scope of the betrayal crashed over me. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't my imagination. This was a methodical, premeditated destruction of everything I'd built, orchestrated by my own family. My parents hadn't invested in my company because they finally believed in me. They'd invested to gain control, to give Sarah the leverage she needed to push me out. Every warm smile, every proud comment, every moment of false hope had been carefully calculated manipulation. I stood there in the dark hallway, my phone forgotten, listening to them discuss the timeline for my removal like I was a problem to be solved rather than their daughter. The worst part wasn't Sarah's betrayal. Somewhere deep down, I'd sensed her growing hostility. The worst part was knowing that my parents had been part of it from the beginning, that their investment had been a trap, that their brief show of love had been nothing more than bait. The little girl inside me who'd spent her entire life craving their approval finally died in that moment. In its place, something harder and more dangerous was born, a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. I slipped out as quietly as I'd entered, leaving my phone behind. I had bigger things to worry about than staying connected. The conference room at Ascend Labs felt like a tomb as I sat across from my parents and their team of lawyers. The mahogany table that had once hosted my proudest presentations now stretched between us like a chasm, covered with documents that would seal my fate. Sarah sat quietly to the side, her face a mask of reluctant concern, playing her role perfectly. "Anna," my father began, his voice carrying the same tone he'd used to discipline me as a child, "we need to discuss the future of Ascend Labs." He slid a thick folder across the table, the sound of paper on wood unnaturally loud in the silence. "We've been reviewing your performance as CEO, and frankly, we're concerned." My hands trembled as I opened the folder, revealing performance reviews I'd never seen before. The letterhead was official, the signatures legitimate, but the words felt like daggers. "Lack strategic vision. Resistant to collaborative leadership. Demonstrates concerning patterns of isolation and poor decision-making." Each critique was detailed, specific, and utterly devastating. "These aren't real," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I never received these reviews. This is..." "Anna, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," my mother interrupted, her tone gentle but final. "We've documented everything. The missed deadlines, the client complaints, the internal friction you've created." She pulled out another document, this one bearing my own signature. "Section 7.3 of the equity agreement you signed clearly states that majority shareholders can demand CEO resignation due to strategic realignment or sustained performance issues." The blood drained from my face as I stared at the contract, my own handwriting, my own signature, my own naive trust now weaponized against me. I'd signed these papers during that euphoric dinner when I thought they finally believed in me. I'd been so desperate for their approval, so grateful for their investment, that I'd barely glanced at the fine print. "You can't do this," I said, my voice cracking. "This is my company. I built this from nothing. You can't just..." "We're doing this for your own good, Anna," my father said, his expression softening just enough to twist the knife deeper. "For the family's legacy. You're clearly overwhelmed, and frankly, Sarah has demonstrated the kind of leadership vision that Ascend Labs needs to reach its full potential." Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. "Anna, I never wanted it to come to this. But you have to see that you're struggling. The team is concerned, the investors are asking questions. Maybe this could be a chance for you to step back, to find what really makes you happy." The manipulation was so skillful, so precisely targeted at my deepest insecurities, that for a moment I almost believed them. Almost accepted that maybe I really was the problem, that maybe I really had failed. "Please," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "This company is everything to me. It's all I have. I can improve, I can." "The decision is final," my mother said, her voice cutting through my desperation like ice. "Don't embarrass us by fighting this, Anna. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." The weight of their betrayal crashed over me like a tsunami. These people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had systematically destroyed everything I'd built, using my own desperate need for their approval as ammunition. The contracts were binding, the evidence fabricated but legally sound, the traps so perfectly constructed that I couldn't see any way out. I slumped in my chair, feeling the last of my fight drain away. The little girl who'd spent her entire life trying to earn their love finally understood that it had never been available to begin with. They'd played a long game, and I'd been nothing more than a pawn. As the lawyers shuffled their papers and my parents discussed transition timelines, I felt something inside me break completely. I was financially trapped, legally bound, and emotionally shattered. The company I'd sacrificed everything for was being stolen from me by the very people I'd trusted most. That night, I lay on my apartment floor, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of absolute defeat. I had nothing left, no company, no family, no future. The document sat on my coffee table like a death sentence, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't see a single path forward. The tears had dried 3 days ago, leaving behind something far more dangerous, a crystalline clarity that cut through years of self-doubt and desperate hope. I sat in my apartment at 2 a.m., surrounded by laptops, legal documents, and handwritten notes that would have looked like conspiracy theory material to anyone else. But this wasn't paranoia. This was war. The first step was understanding exactly what I was dealing with. I'd spent 72 hours dissecting every contract, every clause, every legal loophole my family thought they'd use to trap me. They were right about one thing: I was legally bound to resign as CEO. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd focused so intensely on removing me from leadership that they'd overlooked the intellectual property agreements I'd crafted in the early days. The core AI algorithms that made Ascend Labs valuable? I developed them before their investment, before Sarah's arrival, before any of their legal machinations began. The original code was mine, registered under my personal LLC that predated their involvement. They could steal my company, but they couldn't steal my brain. Phoenix Solutions, I whispered to myself, testing the name of my new venture. It felt right, rising from the ashes of their betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my lead developer. Coffee tomorrow? Need to discuss some opportunities. The message was carefully neutral, but I could read between the lines. Marcus wasn't the only one who'd grown uncomfortable with Sarah's management style. 3 other key developers had reached out with similar cryptic messages over the past week. I spent the next morning in a tiny cafe across town, far from anywhere my family might accidentally encounter us. Marcus slid into the booth across from me, his face tight with barely contained anger. "They're destroying everything you built," he said without preamble. "Sarah's turning your productivity platform into some generic corporate wellness app. She's getting the personalization algorithms, the machine learning capabilities, everything that made us special." "I know," I said simply, watching his reaction carefully. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" That afternoon, I had similar conversations with Jennifer from marketing, David from business development, and 3 other core team members. Each meeting was conducted with the precision of a spy operation: different locations, different times, no paper trails. By evening, I had commitments from 6 key employees who were willing to jump ship when the time was right. The real challenge was the clients. Our biggest contract was with Meridian Corporation, the Fortune 500 company that had been our breakthrough success. I developed a personal relationship with their Chief Technology Officer, Amanda Rivers, over the past 2 years. But convincing her to follow me would require delicate maneuvering. "Anna, I have to be honest," Amanda said during our supposedly routine check-in call. "We're very loyal to Ascend Labs. The transition with Sarah as CEO has been smooth, and we're impressed with the new direction." My heart sank, but I pressed on. "I understand your position, Amanda. But I need to ask you something confidentially. Are you completely satisfied with the level of innovation you're seeing? The personalized AI features that made your initial implementation so successful?" There was a pause. "Well, Sarah mentioned those features might be streamlined for better corporate integration." "Streamlined," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Amanda, those algorithms took me 3 years to develop. They're the reason your productivity metrics increased by 40%. If they're streamlined, you're essentially getting a generic platform that any of our competitors could provide." Another pause, longer this time. "What exactly are you suggesting, Anna?" "I'm suggesting that innovation doesn't always come from the biggest company. Sometimes it comes from the hungriest one." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Amanda asking increasingly pointed questions about my future plans. I couldn't reveal everything, not yet, but I planted enough seeds to ensure she'd be receptive when the time came. That night, as I worked on transferring critical client data to my personal encrypted servers, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my office. My heart hammered against my ribs as I quickly minimized the data transfer window, pulling up a random productivity report just as the door handle turned. Sarah's face appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned but sharp. "Working late again, Anna? You know, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Maybe it's time to start thinking about work-life balance." "Just trying to stay on top of things during the transition," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "You know how it is." She lingered in the doorway for a moment longer, her eyes scanning my desk, my screens, my carefully neutral expression. Well, don't burn yourself out. We need you healthy for the handover process. After she left, I sat in the darkness for 10 minutes, waiting for my pulse to return to normal. The data transfer was only halfway complete, but I couldn't risk resuming it tonight. This was going to be a longer game than I'd hoped. But as I packed up my things, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. They thought they'd broken me, destroyed me, reduced me to nothing. Instead, they'd freed me from the last vestiges of hope that had kept me tied to their approval. I was done playing their game. It was time to create my own. Standing in that boardroom again, surrounded by the same mahogany walls where I'd once presented my proudest achievements, I felt strangely calm. The documents for my forced resignation sat on the table between us like a death sentence, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. Before I sign anything, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake building inside me, I need to understand something. Why are you really doing this? After everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed, why? My father leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to that familiar patronizing tone I'd endured my entire life. Anna Caldwell, we've given you every opportunity, he began, his voice dripping with condescension, but Ascend Labs has grown beyond your capabilities. It needs real leadership now, someone with Sarah's vision. The words hit like physical blows, each one precisely calibrated to cut deepest. Real leadership. As if the company I'd built from nothing in a cramped apartment, surviving on ramen and pure determination, wasn't real enough for them. My mother nodded, her gaze sweeping over the gathered executives with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of polite destruction. We're not taking anything away from you, dear, she chimed in, a sickeningly sweet smile on her face. We're simply ensuring the family legacy is secured. Sarah is the future, the one truly capable of taking this to the next level. This is for the greater good of us all. Sarah just smirked, a silent agreement with their warped justification. That expression, smug, satisfied, victorious, crystallized everything I'd endured. They truly believed they were making the right decision, that I was simply a hurdle to their grander, more profitable vision for their company. A company I'd bootstrapped to success against all odds. They thought they were being benevolent, not cruel. The silence stretched as they waited for my inevitable surrender, my predictable collapse into grateful acceptance of their wisdom. I could see it in their faces, the expectation that I would thank them, that I would recognize their superior judgment and step aside gracefully. Instead, I smiled. You're absolutely right, I said, reaching for the pen. I resign as CEO of Ascend Labs, effective immediately. The relief that washed over their faces was almost comical. Sarah's smirk widened. My mother's shoulders relaxed. My father nodded approvingly, already mentally rewriting history to make himself the hero of this story. I signed the document with deliberate strokes, each letter of my name a small act of liberation. Then I set the pen down and looked directly at Sarah. Congratulations on your new position, I said, my voice carrying a warmth that made her blink in confusion. I'm sure you'll do wonderfully with what's left. What's left? My father's voice carried the first hint of uncertainty. Oh, didn't I mention? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to an email I'd prepared that morning. I've been quite busy these past few weeks. Phoenix Solutions officially launched this morning. We're a productivity AI company specializing in personalized workplace optimization. The color began draining from Sarah's face as the implications sank in. You see, while you were all focused on removing me from leadership, you forgot something crucial. The core algorithms that make Ascend Labs valuable? I developed them before your investment, before Sarah joined, before any of your legal machinations began. They're mine, legally and intellectually. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. Anna, what are you saying? I'm saying that Marcus, Jennifer, David, and 5 other key employees tendered their resignations this morning. They'll be joining Phoenix Solutions effective Monday. I scrolled through my messages, savoring each notification. Oh, and Meridian Corporation? They've decided to transfer their contract to Phoenix Solutions. Seems they were concerned about Ascend Labs' new direction. The room erupted in chaos. My father's face went purple with rage. You can't do this. We have contracts, legal obligations, which I'm not violating, I interrupted calmly. I'm not competing with your wellness app platform. I'm building something entirely different, the productivity AI that you were planning to streamline out of existence. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. The other clients. 3 more contracts are transferring this week. It turns out, Anna, that personal relationships matter in business. Who knew? I stood up, gathering my things with deliberate slowness. The really beautiful part is that you'll still have all those fabricated performance reviews and legal documents proving I was an incompetent CEO. That should make for interesting conversations with your remaining clients. The fury on their faces was everything I'd imagined and more. My father's hands shook as he gripped the table. My mother's perfect composure cracked completely. Sarah looked like she was about to be sick. You've destroyed everything, my father growled. No, I said, pausing at the door. I've saved everything that mattered. The innovation, the vision, the actual value, that's coming with me. You can keep the corporate wellness platform and the family legacy. I'm building something better. As I walked out of that boardroom for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear the chaos beginning, raised voices, panicked phone calls, the sound of a carefully constructed plan crumbling into dust. They'd taught me that love was conditional, that family was about control, that success meant playing by their rules. But in trying to destroy me, they'd freed me to discover something far more valuable. The difference between being needed and being valued, between family and loyalty, between their approval and my own self-worth. The phoenix had risen, and she was nothing like the girl who'd once begged for their love. 6 months later, I stood in Phoenix Solutions' sleek downtown office, watching my team of 25 brilliant minds work on innovations that would have been impossible under my family's suffocating control. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the Inc. 5,000 fastest-growing companies plaque that had arrived just last week. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, another Fortune 500 inquiry. We're going to need a bigger office soon. I smiled, remembering the cramped apartment where this all began. Success felt different now, cleaner, earned rather than desperately sought. The news about Ascend Labs had reached me through industry contacts, though I'd stopped actively seeking updates months ago. The company that had once been my everything was hemorrhaging money, crushed under the weight of the strategic expenses I'd left behind. The enterprise software licenses I'd renewed for 3 years in advance. The premium cloud infrastructure contracts that couldn't be cancelled. The consulting agreements with firms that specialized in AI development. All legitimate, all necessary for the vision they'd claimed to support, and all devastatingly expensive for a company that no longer had the talent to utilize them. Sarah had lasted exactly 4 months as CEO before the board forced her out. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same performance review tactics they'd used against me had ultimately consumed her when quarterly reports revealed the true extent of their losses. My parents had tried to step in personally, but pharmaceutical consulting and tech innovation required entirely different skill sets. Within 6 months, they'd burned through their initial investment and were desperately seeking buyers for what remained. Anna? Jennifer appeared at my office door, holding a tablet with our latest metrics. The Meridian contract expansion just went through. They're implementing our platform across all their international offices. Excellent, I said, accepting the tablet. The numbers were staggering: revenue that exceeded Ascend Labs' peak performance, profit margins that reflected our lean, efficient structure, and most importantly, client satisfaction scores that validated everything I'd believed about authentic innovation. The woman staring back at me from the office window's reflection was someone my family wouldn't recognize. Gone was the desperate girl who'd measured her worth by their approval. In her place stood someone who'd learned the difference between being feared and being respected, between commanding attention and earning it. My parents had called exactly once since the Phoenix Solutions launch. My father's voice had been carefully controlled, suggesting we work together as a family to find a mutually beneficial solution. I'd listened politely, then explained that I was no longer interested in family business ventures. The silence that followed spoke volumes about their expectation that I would eventually crawl back, grateful for any opportunity to rejoin their circle. They'd fundamentally misunderstood what drove me. It was never about the money or the prestige, it was about building something meaningful, something that reflected my vision rather than their limitations. Phoenix Solutions wasn't just a company, it was proof that their version of success had been too small for what I was capable of achieving. The toxic dynamic that had defined my entire life had finally been broken, not through confrontation or therapy, but through the simple act of walking away and building something better. I no longer checked their social media, no longer felt that familiar pang of longing when I saw happy families at restaurants, no longer measured my achievements against their impossible standards. As I prepared to leave for the day, I caught a glimpse of a framed photo on my desk. My entire Phoenix Solutions team at our company retreat, laughing and celebrating our latest product launch. These people had chosen to follow me not out of family obligation or guilt, but because they believed in the vision we were building together. Their loyalty was earned, not inherited. That evening, I sat in my apartment, a real apartment now, with actual furniture and artwork that reflected my taste rather than my budget, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete satisfaction with my own life. Not the desperate, grasping satisfaction of finally earning approval, but the deep, quiet contentment of knowing I'd built something authentic and valuable. The girl who'd once begged for scraps of love from people who saw her as a disappointment was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's outgrowing the need for their validation entirely. Phoenix Solutions would continue to grow, but more importantly, so would I. And that growth would happen on my terms, at my pace, according to my vision of what success actually meant. The Phoenix had risen, and she was magnificent.